The afternoon sun was warm and gentle over the quiet street. It was the kind of day that felt peaceful, where the biggest noise was the rustle of leaves or a distant lawnmower. In his small, tidy house, the old man was having a bad day. His mind these days was like a television that sometimes changed channels on its own. One moment he was here, the next he was years in the past. Today, the confusion was loud and frightening. He felt a deep, nervous need to protect his home. He stepped out into his front yard, his hands shaking slightly. He wasn't a threat. He was just a thin, elderly man with kind eyes that now held fear. In his hand, he clutched a small garden trowel, the metal blade no bigger than his palm. He had been planting flowers earlier, trying to hold on to the simple routines that made him feel like himself. But now, to his confused thoughts, it felt like a necessary tool for defense. He muttered to himself, talking to memories that only he could see. A neighbor, watching from a window, saw the old man waving the trowel and speaking to the empty air. Worried, thinking he might hurt himself, the neighbor made a call they hoped was helpful. They called the police for a welfare check. They just wanted someone to make sure the nice old man was okay. The call came over the police radio as a simple check. Officer Miller heard it in his patrol car. His partner, Rex, sat alert in the specially designed back seat. Rex was a magnificent German shepherd, all powerful muscles and a glossy coat. His eyes watched his handler's every move. To Officer Miller, Rex was more than a dog. He was a partner, a piece of equipment that could sniff out danger and stop a running suspect. Their bond was built on absolute trust and rigorous training. When Officer Miller pulled up to the house, he saw what his training told him to see: an emotionally disturbed person, possibly armed, refusing to comply. He didn't see a scared grandfather. He saw a subject holding a metal object. His pulse quickened a little. This was a situation that needed to be controlled. He stepped out of the car, his uniform crisp and authoritative. "Sir," he called out, his voice firm and loud, "I need you to put the item down on the ground for me." The old man turned, startled by the sudden voice. He saw the police officer, the uniform, the serious face. In his swirling mind, the officer became a stranger threatening his home. He gripped the trowel tighter, holding it up not as a weapon, but as a feeble shield. "Stay back," he cried out, his voice thin and cracking. "This is my home." Officer Miller took this as defiance. He unholstered his taser, the red laser dot appearing on the old man's worn sweater. "Drop it now, sir. This is your last warning." The command echoed in the quiet street. The old man just shuffled backwards towards his porch, his sanctuary. He was crying now, tears tracing lines down his wrinkled cheeks. He was lost, terrified, and utterly alone in his fear. More police cars arrived quietly, blocking the street. The scene was no longer just a welfare check. It had escalated. Officers took positions behind their car doors. The air, once warm and gentle, was now tight with tension. You could hear the static from the police radios and the soft, anxious mumbling of the old man. Officer Miller felt the eyes of his fellow officers on him. He had to secure the scene. He had to protect everyone, including the old man from himself. He made a decision. He had the perfect tool to end this safely, without anyone getting seriously hurt. He looked at Rex, who was watching the scene intently from the back seat, his body vibrating with focused energy. "Rex," Officer Miller said, his voice low and commanding. He opened the car door. The big shepherd jumped out and stood perfectly at his handler's side, waiting. The dog's eyes were fixed on the old man, but he was listening only for his handler's voice. Officer Miller pointed a firm finger. "Fas," he commanded. The word was sharp, clear, and final. It was the command Rex had trained for over and over. It meant apprehend. It meant grip. It meant stop the threat. For a heartbeat, Rex did exactly what he was bred and trained to do. His powerful body coiled, and he surged forward, a blur of motion aimed straight at the thin, crying figure on the porch. The officers watching held their breath. This would be over in seconds. But those seconds stretched out. Rex closed the distance in a few strides, his nails clicking on the pavement. He was just a few feet from the old man, close enough to see the tears, to smell the familiar scent of old books, garden soil, and a faint, forgotten trace of a home. And then he stopped. It wasn't a train stop. It was a jolting, skidding halt. His entire body language changed in an instant. The aggressive forward pitch melted away. His ears, which had been pinned back, swiveled forward. The deep growl that had begun in his throat died, replaced by a confused, high-pitched whine. He stood frozen, his head cocked to one side, his nose working the air frantically. He looked at the old man, really looked. He saw the posture, the shape of him, the way he held his hands. A flood of memories, buried deep under layers of training and discipline, surged to the surface. Memories of gentle hands petting him, of quiet afternoons in a different sunlit yard, of a voice that spoke with kindness, not commands. He turned his head sharply back to Officer Miller, his eyes wide and questioning. This, his whole being seemed to ask. Asterisk, you want me to bite this? Asterisk, Rex, fast. Officer Miller barked again, his face flushing with a mix of confusion and professional embarrassment. The dog was disobeying, in front of everyone, but Rex would not. He slowly, deliberately, sat down on the pavement between his handler and the old man. He placed his own body as a barrier. He let out a single soft woof, not a bark of threat, but one of announcement. He looked back at the crying man, and his tail gave one tentative, thumping wag against the ground. On the porch, the old man's weeping had quieted. He was staring at the dog, his eyes wide with a dawning recognition that cut through the fog of his fear. The animal's shape, the way it moved, it tugged at a deeply cherished, painful part of his heart. A name, long unused, formed on his lips in a whisper no one could yet hear. A stunned silence had fallen over the entire street. The police officers were frozen in place, unsure of what to do next. The mighty K9, their reliable tool, had just refused a direct order. And in that shocking, silent pause, everything began to change. The silence that fell over the street was heavy and complete. It wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that feels loud with shock. For a long moment, nobody moved. The old man stood frozen on his porch step, the little garden trowel hanging loosely from his fingers. The police officers behind their car doors stared, their training manuals offering no chapter for this. And in the middle of the quiet street, the dog named Rex sat, a living statue of disobedience. Officer Miller felt his face grow hot. This was impossible. Rex was the best dog in the unit. He had never, not once, hesitated on a command. The dog's loyalty was absolute. Or so he had believed. Now, in front of his fellow officers, his authority had just crumbled because of a dog. A wave of confusion, then frustration, washed over him. This situation was spiraling, and his primary tool had broken. Rex, he said again, his voice strained. Higher, come here. Rex turned his head slightly towards the familiar command to come. His body twitched, a lifetime of training pulling at him. But he didn't get up. He looked back at the old man, then at Officer Miller, and let out another soft, pleading whine. It was the sound a dog makes when it is torn, when it doesn't understand why it is being asked to do something that feels deeply wrong in its bones. On the porch, the old man slowly lowered himself to sit on the top step. The fight seemed to have drained out of him, replaced by a tired wonder. He dropped the trowel with a clatter that made everyone flinch. But he wasn't looking at the police. He was staring only at the dog. His vision was a little blurry, but the shape of the animal was so familiar. The way the light caught his fur, the particular slope of his back. A memory, sharp and painful, broke through the fog in his mind. It was a memory of a younger dog, a silly puppy really, chasing butterflies in a backyard filled with roses his wife had planted. The dog's name had been Buddy, his buddy, lost so long ago, after the dark days when his wife was gone and he had to move, and his heart was too broken to keep track of anything. He had cried for that dog for months. He leaned forward, squinting. His voice, when it came, was a dry rasp, barely more than a whisper. Buddy? At the sound of that name, the dog's entire body reacted as if it had been touched by an electric current. He jerked his head up, his ears, which had been swiveling nervously, pinned forward. A full-body shiver ran from his nose to the tip of his tail. That word, that specific, soft sound. It was a key, turning in a lock deep inside him. Opening a door he thought had been sealed shut forever. He scrambled to his feet, not with the controlled power of a police K-9, but with the clumsy, eager energy of a pet. He took 2 hesitant steps forward, his nose working overtime. Then he let out a sound no officer on the scene had ever heard from him, a high, joyful yip followed by a string of eager whines. His tail began to wag, not the slow metronome of a working dog, but a wide, frantic, whole-body wag that made his hips swing. He trotted the last few feet to the porch steps and shoved his head into the old man's trembling hands. He licked his fingers over and over, smelling the garden soil, the faint trace of the soap he used, the undeniable and ancient scent of home. The old man's hands, which had been shaking with fear, now shook with a different emotion. He buried his fingers in the thick fur of the dog's neck, feeling the familiar coarse texture. A sob escaped him, but this time it was mixed with a disbelieving laugh. Buddy, is it really you, boy? He leaned his forehead against the dog's head, and they stayed that way, man and dog, in a private world of rediscovery. For Officer Miller, the world was tilting on its axis. The frustration melted away, replaced by a dawning, awful understanding. He watched the scene, the pure, unguarded affection between the two, and the pieces clicked into place with a sickening clarity. The dog's refusal. The old man's whispered name. This wasn't disobedience. This was recognition. A veteran officer, a sergeant with graying hair and calm eyes, had been observing from the side. She had seen many things in her career, but never this. While others saw a problem, she suddenly saw a story. She moved slowly, holding up a hand to keep the other officers still. She walked not toward the old man, but toward Officer Miller. Her steps quiet on the asphalt dot, she put a hand on the younger officer's shoulder. "Stand down," she said, her voice low but firm. "Look at them." Officer Miller could only nod, his throat tight. He watched as the dog Rex Buddy, whoever he was now, sat proudly on the step beside the old man, leaning his full weight against the thin leg as if to hold him up. The dog's posture was protective, but not of the police. He was protecting the old man from the police. The sergeant then approached the porch slowly, moving like one might approach a skittish animal. She stopped a respectful distance away. "Sir?" she said, her voice gentle, completely different from the megaphone tones of minutes before. "Can you tell me your dog's name?" The old man looked up, his eyes clearer now, though filled with tears. "This is my Buddy," he said, his voice gaining strength as he stroked the dog's head. "I lost him years ago, after my Ellen passed. I thought he was gone forever." The dog thumped his tail heavily on the wooden step at the sound of his old name. Back by the cars, the officers began to lower their weapons fully. The tension bled out of the street, replaced by a collective sense of wonder. The call had gone out over the radios as a situation contained, but no code could explain what had just happened. They all watched as the sergeant talked softly to the old man, who was now explaining about his fuzzy mind, about getting confused, about just being scared in his own yard. Officer Miller finally holstered his taser. The weight of it felt wrong now. He walked slowly towards the porch, each step feeling heavy. Rex's buddy watched him approach and gave a single quiet wag of his tail, but didn't leave the old man's side. The dog was not being defiant. He was simply where he belonged. The officer looked at the old man, really looked at him for the first time. He saw the tears, the fragility, the humanity. He saw the joyful disbelief in the way he touched the dog. And he looked at his partner, his loyal K9, who had just taught him the most important lesson of his career without making a single sound. He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, the words feeling inadequate. "We didn't know." The old man just nodded, too absorbed in the miracle of the furry head in his lap. The crisis was over. It hadn't ended with force or restraint. It had ended with a remembered name, a wagging tail, and a bond so strong it had stopped a police dog in its tracks. The real story, the one that would change everything for everyone involved, was just beginning. The scene on the quiet street had changed completely. The flashing lights still pulsed, but the feeling in the air was no longer sharp and dangerous. It was soft with disbelief. The old man sat on his porch step, his thin arms wrapped around the big dog's neck. The dog leaned into him, its eyes closed in what looked like pure contentment. The little garden trowel lay forgotten on the grass. The veteran sergeant kept everyone back, giving the two of them space. She spoke quietly into her radio, asking for a social worker from the county and for someone to bring a bottle of water. Her main job now was to slow everything down. The immediate danger was clearly over, but a delicate new situation had taken its place. Officer Miller stood a few feet away, feeling completely lost. He watched his partner, Rex, who was no longer acting like Rex at all. The dog's focused, professional demeanor was gone. In its place was a goofy, loving pet, nuzzling and licking the old man's face, tail never stopping its joyful sweep. The officer felt a confusing mix of emotions. There was relief that no one was hurt, but there was also a deep, nagging shame. He had given the command. He had ordered his dog to attack this frail, confused man who was now crying tears of happiness. The memory of his own loud, harsh voice shouting "Fass" made his stomach turn. He walked slowly up to the sergeant, his boots feeling like they were made of lead. "Sarge, I don't understand what happened," he said, his voice low. The sergeant looked at him, not with anger, but with a thoughtful expression. "I think you just saw a miracle, kid," she said. "But we need to understand it. We can't just leave." She nodded toward the old man. "He's not well. And that," she pointed at the dog, "is police property. We have to sort this out." The word property hit Officer Miller strangely. Rex had never felt like property to him. He was a partner. But now, seeing him with the old man, he looked like something even more, a family member who had been found. The social worker arrived first, a woman with a kind face and a calm way of moving. She sat on the step next to the old man, not too close, and started talking to him in a gentle, normal voice, like a neighbor over a fence. She asked him his name. He told her. She asked him about the dog. "Oh, this is my buddy," the old man said, his voice stronger now, filled with wonder. He scratched behind the dog's ears exactly the way the dog loved. "I got him as a puppy for my wife. She adored him. He was her shadow. When she passed, he was all I had left of her. Then I had to move to this smaller place. One day, he just ran out the door. I looked for him for months. I put up signs. I called every shelter. His eyes grew distant and sad. My mind wasn't so good then either. I think I left a gate open. I think it was my fault. As he spoke, Buddy pushed his head under the old man's hand. As if to say it wasn't his fault at all, Dot the social worker listened, nodding. She asked if he had any pictures, anything from before. The old man's eyes lit up. Inside, he said. In the living room. On the shelf. An officer, under the sergeant's direction, went carefully into the house. It was tidy but old-fashioned, with the quiet smell of a life lived alone. On a wooden shelf, there were several framed photographs. One showed the old man and a smiling woman, much younger, with a gangly-legged German Shepherd puppy between them. Another, taken a few years later, showed the same dog grown into its big paws, sitting proudly next to the old man's wife in a garden. The officer brought the frames outside. When the old man saw them, he nodded eagerly. Yes, that's him. That's my buddy. But the real proof was in the second picture. The social worker looked closely, then at the dog on the porch. There, in the old photograph on the dog's left front leg, was a distinct diamond-shaped patch of lighter fur. She looked at Buddy's leg. There, in exactly the same place, was the same unique marking. Time and growth had not erased it, Dot. She showed the picture to the sergeant and to Officer Miller. There was no doubt. The police dog Rex and the lost dog Buddy were the same animal. Officer Miller felt the ground under him shift again. He thought back to Rex's records. The dog had been found as a stray, hungry, and wandering near the highway over 3 years ago. He was picked up by animal control, and because he was young, strong, and showed intelligence, he was offered to the police canine program. He had no microchip. No one had ever come looking for him at the shelter. He was a blank slate, ready to be molded into Rex. Dot. He had been an amazing student. Obedient, brave, and focused. But now Officer Miller wondered about the small things, the things he had brushed off as personality quirks. How Rex sometimes seemed to stare at older men in the park. How he was always strangely calm around gardening tools in backyards. He had never made the connection. How could he have? The sergeant took a deep breath. The facts were laid out before them. A confused, elderly man with dementia. A lost dog, now a highly trained police dog, miraculously reunited with his original owner. And a police department caught right in the middle. This isn't a policing problem anymore, the sergeant said quietly to Officer Miller and the social worker. This is a human problem. We can't just take the dog and leave. Look at him. They all looked. The old man was talking animatedly to Buddy, showing him the photograph. His confusion seemed to have lifted, pushed aside by this incredible joy. His hands were steady. For the first time that afternoon, he looked like he was truly present. And we can't just leave the man here alone, the social worker added softly. He's vulnerable. Today proved that. He needs support. Officer Miller finally found his voice. What happens to Rex? He asked. The question felt selfish, but he had to ask it. The sergeant gave him a long look. His name is Buddy, she said gently. And I don't know. But his job today wasn't to bite. It was to remember. And he did that better than any of us. She walked over and crouched down near the old man. Sir, she said, we're going to make sure you're okay. We're going to get you some help so you don't have to be so scared or alone. And we're going to figure all of this out about Buddy. I promise. The old man just hugged his dog tighter. He was home. Finally, after all these years, he was home. And in that simple, powerful act of holding on, he had unraveled a police operation and started a chain of events that no one could have predicted. The hardest part, figuring out what a happy ending could possibly look like for everyone, was still to come. The next few hours were a slow, careful dance of paperwork and phone calls. The old man's small house, which had been a place of fear, became a calm hub of activity. The social worker stayed with him, helping him drink some tea and eat a little toast. She spoke softly to him about getting some extra help at home, about people who could come and check on him. The old man listened, but his attention kept drifting back to the dog sitting solidly against his knee. Buddy, for his part, didn't move an inch. He was on duty again, but a different kind of duty. He was guarding his person. Outside, the police cars began to leave, one by one. The neighbors, who had been watching from behind curtains, slowly came out onto their lawns. They spoke in hushed tones, having seen the unbelievable scene unfold. They knew the old man was a bit forgetful, but they had no idea about the story sleeping in his past. Officer Miller was the last officer to stay, aside from the sergeant. He felt he couldn't leave. He leaned against his patrol car, watching the porch. His mind was racing. He thought of all the trainings, the high-stakes scenarios, the track where Rex would sprint after a padded suspect and grip the arm with perfect, controlled pressure. That dog was gone. Or rather, that version of the dog had stepped aside for someone older, more fundamental. The sergeant walked over to him, holding 2 cups of coffee she'd gotten from a neighbor. She handed one to him. "Drink," she said. "It's going to be a long night of reports." He took the cup, the warmth feeling foreign in his hands. "What's going to happen, Sarge?" he asked. Really happen?" She sighed, looking at the house. "Well, the immediate crisis is solved. He's safe, the dog is safe. But the social worker is right. He can't live alone like this. It's not safe for him. The county will help find a place for him, maybe a nice assisted living facility." Officer Miller's heart sank. "And Rex?" "Buddy, he'd have to go to a kennel, right? He's department property. We'd have to retrain him or retire him to another handler." The words tasted bitter. The sergeant gave him a sidelong glance. "You think that dog would work for anyone else after today? You saw him. He made his choice. He chose his old life. But the rules—" Officer Miller started. "Sometimes," the sergeant interrupted, her voice firm but not unkind, "the human thing and the rule book thing don't line up. Our job is to figure out the bridge between them." A little while later, a man from the county's adult services arrived. He went inside and talked with the old man and the social worker for a long time. Officer Miller could see them through the window, nodding, looking at papers. The old man looked tired but peaceful, his hand resting on Buddy's head the whole time. Finally, the sergeant waved Officer Miller over. They went inside. The small living room felt crowded but quiet. The old man looked up at the young officer, and for a moment, Officer Miller saw a flicker of the fear from earlier. He felt a fresh pang of guilt. He crouched down, putting himself below the old man's eye level, the way he'd been taught to do with scared children. "Sir," he said, his voice thick, "I am so very sorry for how I shouted at you today. I didn't understand. I was wrong." The old man studied his face for a moment. Then he slowly nodded. "You were just doing your job, son," he said. "I was? I wasn't in my right mind. But you found my buddy for me. You brought him home. It was forgiveness he didn't deserve, offered so simply it took his breath away." A county worker cleared his throat. "We have a plan," he said. "There's a good place, Sunshine Gardens. It's not a nursing home. It's like little apartments where folks can have their own things, but there's help with meals and medicine, and people around all the time. They have a visiting doctor. They even have a small garden. The old man's face fell. But Buddy? They won't let me have Buddy there. No places allow dogs. His hand clenched in the dog's fur. This was the impossible knot. The dog was the key to the old man's peace, but the dog was also a working police animal, and no facility would allow a large, powerful German shepherd, especially one trained as a police dog. The sergeant spoke up. "What if," she said slowly, thinking out loud, "he wasn't a pet? What if he was a certified companion animal? A therapy dog, specifically for residents with dementia?" Everyone looked at her. The county worker frowned. "Is he certified? That's a long process." "No," the sergeant said, "but he's a police dog. He has more advanced obedience training than any therapy dog in the state. He's trained for public access. He's non-aggressive unless commanded." And, she added, looking at the way the dog was molded to the old man's side, "his therapeutic value for this specific man is already proven. Today proved it." She turned to Officer Miller. "What would it take? A full behavioral assessment? A sign-off from the K-9 unit commander?" A spark of hope flickered in Officer Miller's chest. He'd pass any temperament test with flying colors. "He's the most stable dog I've ever worked with. Until today," he added with a weak smile. "The department would have to agree to release him," the sergeant said, "to officially retire him and donate him as a companion animal. It's unprecedented. But so is this." The old man was watching them, his eyes going back and forth as they talked, not fully understanding the bureaucracy, but clinging to the tone of hope. "It's a lot of hurdles," the county worker said, but he didn't say no. He was jotting things down. For the rest of the evening, the plan took shaky shape. The social worker would take the old man to stay temporarily with a respite care family while the Sunshine Gardens apartment was prepared. It was the hardest part. When the kind woman told him he had to come with her, just for a little while, the old man's fear returned. He shook his head, grabbing Buddy's collar. No, we stay together. We just found each other." It was Officer Miller who had an idea. He walked to his patrol car and came back with the heavy, long leash that clipped to Rex's working harness. He unclipped it and held it out to the old man. "Sir," he said, "Buddy is a police dog. He's on a special assignment now. His assignment is to protect you. I am temporarily transferring him to your care." His voice was official, but his eyes were earnest. "This is his duty leash. You hold on to this. It means he's working for you. We will get his paperwork sorted, and then he will report to you at your new home. That's an order from his handler." The old man looked at the leash, then at the young officer's face. He saw the sincerity there. Slowly, he took the leash. He clipped it carefully to Buddy's collar. The dog looked at Officer Miller, as if waiting for confirmation. Officer Miller gave the dog a firm, clear hand signal, the one for stay and guard. Buddy immediately sat up straighter, his attention fixed on the old man. "See?" Officer Miller said. "He understands the assignment." It was enough. With the leash held tightly in his hand, the old man agreed to go with the social worker. He walked slowly to her car, Buddy walking in perfect heel position beside him, not as a pet on a walk, but as a partner on a mission. Officer Miller and the sergeant watched the car drive away. The street was finally quiet and dark, the last of the sunset just aglow behind the houses. "You're going to have to fight for this," the sergeant said quietly. "The department, the paperwork, the rules." Officer Miller nodded, watching the taillights disappear. For the first time that day, his confusion was gone, replaced by a clear, solid purpose. He had a new mission, too. It wasn't about control or commands anymore. It was about fixing what he had broken and helping to finish the miracle that a dog had started. "I will," he said. "I owe them both that much." The fight for Buddy's future was not a loud one. It happened in quiet offices, over long emails, and during meetings where Officer Miller had to speak up in a room full of people with more stripes on their sleeves than he had. He brought the photographs. He showed the reports from the social worker and the county. He told the story, not as a tale of a dog's disobedience, but as a story of a bond so strong it stopped violence before it could start. Some at the police department saw only the problem. A valuable canine asset, trained with thousands of dollars, was now contaminated. They argued the dog was unreliable, that his loyalty was divided. They talked about reassigning him to a different handler, far away, to retrain the memory out of him, but others listened. The veteran sergeant was his strongest ally. She argued that the dog had, in fact, performed the highest function of public safety. He had de-escalated a volatile situation and protected a vulnerable citizen without a single bite. The K-9 unit commander, a man who had loved dogs all his life, looked at the picture of the younger dog in the old man's garden, then at the reports of the dog's impeccable service record. He saw not a broken tool, but a living creature who had done something extraordinary. In the end, it was the story that won. The local newspaper had gotten wind of it. A neighbor had talked to a reporter. A small article came out. Police dog remembers former owner, halt standoff. The public loved it. Letters and emails trickled into the police department, not with complaints, but with thanks. This was the kind of story people needed. It wasn't about crime. It was about a second chance. 3 weeks after the day on the porch, the paperwork was signed. The police department officially retired the K-9 known as Rex, citing his age and exemplary service. In a special provision, they donated him as a companion animal to the old man. It was a first for the department. Officer Miller printed the final approval email and just held it for a minute, feeling a weight he hadn't even known he was carrying lift from his shoulders. Meanwhile, the old man was settling into his new room at Sunshine Gardens. It was a bright space with his own furniture from home, his favorite chair, the quilt his wife had made, the photographs on the shelf. But it felt empty. He held onto the police leash every day, waiting. His mind had its good days and its fuzzy days, but on every day, he asked the same question: "Is Buddy coming today?" Finally, the day arrived. Officer Miller drove to the facility, not in his marked patrol car, but in his own simple sedan. Buddy sat in the back, wearing a brand-new blue collar, but no harness. He was panting, sensing something important was happening. The officer had a folder of papers and a small duffel bag with the dog's favorite toys and bowl. They walked through the automatic doors into a clean, sunny lobby. The old man was sitting in his chair by the window, just as they had arranged. He was wearing a nice sweater, and his hands were clasped tightly together. When he saw Officer Miller walk in, he started to stand, his eyes searching. Then he saw the dog. A sound escaped him, a small gasp of pure joy. Officer Miller gave the leash a little slack. "Buddy," he said softly, "go see your friend." He didn't need to be told twice. The dog pulled forward, his nails tapping on the tile floor. He went straight to the old man, who had sunk back into his chair, his arms open wide. Buddy didn't jump. He laid his big head in the old man's lap, tail swinging wildly, and let out a long, happy sigh as the old man's hands found their familiar place on his head and behind his ears. "Hey, Buddy. Hey, my good boy," the old man whispered, tears running freely down his smiling face. "You're home. We're both home." Officer Miller stood back, giving them their moment. He saw nurses smiling from their station, other residents pausing to watch the reunion. The scene was so normal, so perfectly simple and human, it was hard to believe it had started with sirens and shouting. After a while, the officer walked over. He handed the folder to the head nurse. "All the official documents," he said. "Vaccination records, transfer of ownership, behavioral certification from our K-9 unit. He's officially a resident now, too." Then he knelt down beside the old man and the dog. He looked at Buddy and gave the command one last time, not in German, but in plain English. "Buddy, your job is to stay, to guard, to be a good friend." The dog licked his hand, then immediately turned his attention back to the old man, as if to say he understood perfectly. The officer visited often. At first, he came once a week, then every other week, always bringing a bag of the special dog biscuits Buddy liked. He wasn't just checking on the dog. He was checking on the old man. They formed an unlikely friendship. The old man would tell him stories about Buddy as a puppy, about his wife and her roses. On his good days, his memories were sharp and clear. On his fuzzy days, he just smiled and petted the dog, content in the silence. Officer Miller changed too. He requested and helped design a new training module for the department, de-escalation and recognizing vulnerability. He used his own experience, his own shame, as a teaching tool. He told the new officers, sometimes the threat isn't what it looks like, and sometimes the solution isn't in your tool belt. It's in seeing the person, not just the problem. The story of that autumn afternoon became a quiet legend in the neighborhood and the police department. But for the two most important characters, life became a peaceful routine. Every morning, Buddy would wake up curled on the rug beside the old man's bed. They would take a slow walk in the facility's garden, the old man holding the leash lightly, Buddy matching his slow pace perfectly. In the afternoons, they would sit in the common room. Other residents would stop by to say hello to the gentle dog. Children visiting their grandparents would light up at the sight of him. Buddy, the former police dog, had a new role. He was a bridge, a comfort, a living reminder of love that lasts. One evening, Officer Miller found them there, sitting by the big window as the sun set. The old man was dozing in his chair. Buddy was awake, his head on the old man's knee, watching the room. When the dog saw the officer, his tail thumped softly on the floor, but he didn't get up. He didn't leave his post. The officer understood. He just smiled and gave a little nod. Buddy had made his choice that day on the porch. And every day since, in the quiet, ordinary moments of peace, he had proven it was the right one. It was a story that didn't end with a single shocking moment, but with 1,000 small, gentle ones, a man and his dog, finally together, keeping each other safe in the simplest and most powerful way possible.